Hi guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast. I hope you're well. I hope you're doing okay. This is part 2 of the interview with World Championship winning F1 race strategist Mike Caulfield. And in this episode, he is going to talk to us about his time at Mercedes and Haas, what it was like to work with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, Michael Schumacher and Jenson Button. Certainly quite a list there. And of course, some memories from that legendary 2016 season between Hamilton and Rosberg from the inside. Now, of course, if you haven't checked out part 1, I definitely recommend that you do so before going on to this one. So if you haven't already, go back to that and then come back for part 2. But until then, guys, hope you enjoy the interview and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Look, let's talk about your career in F1, if we can for a bit. Obviously, you started off as a student placement in Honda back in 2006, if I've researched this correctly. How did that happen? Was it always the plan for you from your school days to work in F1, or was it just something that became an opportunity and you sort of went for it?
That's exactly it. I mean, yeah, I was always a fan of F1, like when I was a kid. So, but even going into university, so even like going into doing an engineering degree, I didn't ever start university thinking, I'm going to go and work in F1. I'm doing this to work in F1. It didn't even really cross my mind that it was a possibility to an extent. It's like, but I was always good at the maths and physics side of things. So engineering was always kind of like the avenue I was going to go down. And then it was just, I was lucky enough that, the kind of advert came out that it was, there was a placement opportunity at Honda. And at that time, I think most teams did them, but obviously not quite to the levels which people are doing them now. So they're not kind of the structured kind of graduate student placements where they were. It was like, I think at the Honda one I went into was, we got an email through university. So just your general CV, etc., sent in, interview. And I think there was literally, if I can count back around, there was six positions there for the year, for a year placement. And so I think there was kind of 3 in vehicle dynamics, 2 in systems, and an IT guy. And that's like, I'm not even sure there was any aero ones at that point. Might have been, but I can't remember. That long ago now.
Was aerodynamics an area that you were specifically interested in?
Aero?
Yes.
No. I mean, for me, I was never. No, not really. Aerodynamics was never kind of my forte. It was. I enjoyed it. But I was never good enough. So quite frankly, I just didn't have the skill set for an aerodynamicist. It's just they are very, very clever subjects. I was just never quite that kind of scope. Now, I was always more interested in the kind of vehicle dynamic side of things. Even though I did surprisingly, I did an aeronautical degree, but that was more about like kind of control systems and just general mechanical engineering in that respect. But but I mean, in that sense, I can't remember them being an aerodynamicist placement when I was there. So but obviously now it's grown to the point where I think every team has quite a good program involved, even if it's a student placement, which is a great place to get started, or a graduate placement. And I think it just allowed me to build those connections and that learning curve when you first go into it, working with experienced engineers and it was just massively helpful. And like as soon as I got in there, I kept that thing, and as soon as I kind of researched, I thought, this sounds really interesting. Actually, I was like, again, like I said, I've been a fan all my life. I was like, why have I never really considered this? And I just never thought it was an option for me. And then I went into it, and it was amazing. So it was definitely obviously helped me very much in my kind of career I went into. So I went in as kind of a vehicle dynamics placement, but I got my first taste of strategy gen. So obviously back then, strategy wasn't quite the level of strategy now. So I think most teams had a strategist, but it was literally one person. So it's not like today's where most teams have 3 or 4 or 5 people in a strategy group and working underneath it like a strategist. Then kind of at Honda was James Wells, who's still the strategist at Mercedes now. So I worked So I did basically a couple of days working for him a week in kind of strategy, kind of just building the kind of tool sets and the analysis tools. And it just kind of made me discover what I wanted to go into. And I was just lucky enough to build those connections and get that kind of work placement and build my skill sets and allowed me to focus on what I wanted to go forward, really. So I was really, I still today say, so I was like, I mean, I worked hard to get there, but at the same point, I mean, there was 6 places. I was just lucky enough that potentially it wasn't advertised as widely as maybe they are now. And like, it was a case of, there was a couple of universities and there wasn't that many people who applied for it. I mean, I think, like I said, there was six people got it, and I think there was only like 70 applicants or something. Whereas now, I think if these kind of things, jobs go out to universities, I imagine you'd go and get probably close to 1,000 students applying for these kind of roles, because it's obviously a very sought after job. So it's and it is the way forward. I mean, just to mention what I saw today, that like Mercedes have posted a lot of apprenticeships for kind of roles. And one of the big main questions I always get asked, like on Twitter or LinkedIn or something like that, is just, well, how do I get into F1? How do I become a race strategist? And I think my main bit of advice is to everyone who wants to get into F1 is that, for a start, don't aim for a specific role. Like, all right, it can be a goal, but like, don't kind of narrow down your options. Just getting into the team is fantastic, because I had no idea, like, when I was going in, that a race strategist, I wanted to be a race strategist. I didn't even really, I knew strategy involved in F1, but that was about as much as my kind of knowledge went to it. It was only being there and like starting to do little bits and pieces in different areas, and thought, that's the one I really like the most. And like I said, it's just being involved in the company. So you never know what opportunities might present themselves and go, actually, that's something I didn't realize existed and was really interested in that. Or I can maybe see what more I need to do and work there. So getting these kind of, applying for these apprenticeships in kind of in your early stage of your career, if you really want to work in F1, is an important piece, I think. And and just working that kind of team environment is a really good atmosphere. I know we've just talked about the workloads of F1 personnel, but like, don't get me wrong, it's a great job, and especially when you're starting off, you're not quite under those kind of pressures. You're not going to be traveling. You're not going to be kind of expected to do like the levels of your more experienced personnel, and you're obviously at that stage of your career as well where you haven't had the enthusiasm beaten out of you. But it was, that's basically how it started off, and I was lucky I could just build my network and connections and managed to obviously then continue forward and got the job at Mercedes once I'd finished university.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an amazing experience, and I did have a few questions about, but you've kind of answered all of them already for me on what the experience was like at Honda, and obviously being a student, obviously getting to see all these exciting things at Brackley, working at the factory, and obviously meeting people and working with James Vowles, who for a lot of people will wonder who that is specifically. James is the famous engineer on the radio with Valtteri Bottas, where all those memes came from, giving him those unpleasant instructions, which I'm pretty sure James definitely didn't want to do. But sometimes you've got to do that in order to win championships. In terms of your role with Honda, how did that differ to, obviously, you've just mentioned your experience at Mercedes when you joined them again in 2010, and this was after the redundancies at Honda, obviously, when they pulled out the sport. Brawn came in, won a championship, and then sold that to Ross Brawn, and Mercedes obviously came into the sport. What was your role when you came into Mercedes? Was it similar to what you did in your student placement, or was it a bit more... how can I put this right? A bit more structured as it would be for a regular member of staff compared to a student.
It was more structured. So obviously my role as a student was like vehicle dynamics group, industrial placement, doing a bit of strategy, and then when I came back, and obviously the work I'd done with James, like I kind of kept in touch with him. I actually did like my master's thesis with him and Honda, like in a bit of a strategy, bit of a vehicle dynamics kind of role, looking at tyres. But I kind of kept those connections. And then when I came back into Mercedes, it was as a full-blown race strategy engineer. So I was then very much in the line of a race strategist job. So it was more structured in that sense. As I was working then, I wasn't working in the vehicle dynamics group, but I was working for James. But it was one of the good things about Mercedes at that time. Obviously, it's a very different entity to what it is now. But Ross was really, because Ross was obviously in charge at the point, and he was really good in terms of he was wanting his younger people, the younger members of staff, to not pigeonhole themselves too much. So he was really encouraging people to try different things. So that gave me the opportunity that even though I was working in the strategy with James, and this is kind of a little bit of a good thing about the strategy job as well, is that strategy encompasses a lot of things, because you need to have that big kind of understanding of your vehicle dynamics, of your race engineering, of your kind of everything that goes into the car performance, your competitor analysis. So working in that allowed me to kind of help out in the kind of simulator as well. So I'd go and do a bit of kind of performance engineering and simulating, helping out the guys there. So learning off the actual race engineers or the performance engineers in that role as well. I kind of helped building with help of a couple of others, helped building up that kind of the race support, what we wanted to do with that, how you build the factory race support to help the racetrack. So again, in that kind of, when I rejoined Mercedes in 2010, you see, I mean, I guess a lot of people have seen these huge kind of mission control, race control kind of the teams have now. When I was back in, when I first started, the intercom was very flaky. Like it was, you didn't have that kind of direct audio stream that you have now. That kind of started getting implemented in those first couple of years I was there. You only had maybe 6 or 7 people in on a weekend kind of doing little bits and pieces, whereas now those big teams, you're going to be having 20, 30 people in doing work and helping out. But I was part of that kind of, I was given that opportunity as one of the members back at the factory. It was obviously I was supporting James, but then I was helping out with a couple of other guys of helping building that process. So you got to experience a lot of things. Got to experience pit stops, because again, strategy obviously is very dependent on your pit stop. So I could go and help work out with the pit stop analysis. So you get to work with the mechanics a little bit and got to know them. So it was I think it's a great thing about the strategy role, is that it's not just your strategy. It's not just like your weekend calling into pit stop. You need to understand a lot of aspects of it. You need to understand kind of the ins and outs of other areas too, because it's all about performance. You need to understand the performance of your car. So you need to understand what's happening with your car to kind of to help you understand what you need to do and what you need to cater for. So those initial era of my Mercedes one was obviously building up my strategy knowledge. It's one part of it. So again, continuing and building the tool sets, understanding races, understanding the kind of ins and outs, what I need to do to help there, provide the analysis, but also getting that understanding of other areas which feeds into the strategy group and then helping out in those areas as well. So that was it was really, really, again, the same as the Honda one, that kind of initial working environment, that learning experience was fantastic.
So obviously you've mentioned a lot about Ross Brawn and obviously what it was like to work under him. Toto Wolff obviously came in a little while after that and has obviously played a big part in helping shape Mercedes to what they are today, but obviously taking it down a completely different route to Ross, because obviously following Ross's career, he'd obviously been involved and been a huge part in building championship winning teams at Benetton, obviously Ferrari, and obviously being a part of Honda, which became Brawn and then Mercedes after that. How do they differ? What was it? What was different about working under Toto compared to someone like Ross Brawn?
I mean, I think it's difficult for me to give a direct comparison, because obviously when Toto came in, so obviously Toto initially came in and Ross was still there, and then obviously the reason Ross left or one of the reasons Ross left was obviously they brought Paddy in alongside. So Toto in that aspect wasn't doing. Toto was more running the kind of business side of things, and Paddy was running the technical side of things. Whereas Ross was obviously your traditional team principal, where he kind of everything kind of fell under him in that one. So while I was there, and obviously Toto has then since taken it on to that more traditional kind of team principal role. I'm not sure what his exact title is, but now he kind of encompasses all under him. Obviously, when I left Mercedes at the end of 2016, and Paddy left at basically the same time as me. So all the time when I was there with Toto, he was in that initiative. He was in a kind of a more business focused role rather than the kind of team technical role. So I can't really compare them like for like. But I always liked Toto. I always thought he was straight talking. I mean, obviously you see him on TV. I thought he was always he understood the ins and outs required for the team. I was very impressed with him when I was there. Like, it was different to Ross, but like I don't think he didn't change things massively. He didn't there wasn't a huge swing of structure when he came in from what Ross was doing. What Ross was doing was obviously, from the early days, was providing that platform for what Mercedes' success is going to be. And it's like, and just as obviously Toto came in, obviously the results hadn't been great for a couple of years, but they were just starting to reap the benefits. I mean, I still to this day I know everyone kind of harps on about, like, obviously 2014 onwards was massively dominant for Mercedes, but I still think that 2013 season is probably the most under talked about performance for Mercedes in terms of their recovery from 2012. Because you got to remember, from 2012 to 2013, there was no regulation change, and Mercedes struggled in 2012. Like, the car was not a good car. It just held on to fifth in the championship. It could have almost been sixth, finishing behind. I think that last race was about Force India at that time, and I think if Hülkenberg hadn't crashed out or something, it was potential for them to overtake. So you got to think at that point, 2012 was not good, as in Force India had a Mercedes-powered car, and they were potentially going to beat the Works team. And then it went obviously into 2013, and yeah, there was no regulation change, but Mercedes had understood the process, started the process, and constantly also thinking that 2014 was this whole new change, which was the main focus. You could have been forgiven for Mercedes' point of view to say, oh, we'll just write off 13, we'll get going in 14 and put everything into it. But 13 was such a success. I know Red Bull ran away with it at the end, but going into that summer shutdown, I think Mercedes had won 3 races. We were only just behind Red Bull, like, going into the second half of the season, and then I think that was the one when Vettel won 9 races in a row or something like that. But and it kind of dropped away, but they still finished second in the championship. And like, I'll reiterate it again, it's like just the understanding and getting on top of the car and being able to develop that car with no regulation change to get it to a point where it was basically the 6th quickest car on the grid to the 2nd quickest car on the grid before the regulation change was coming into 14 was amazing. And that was obviously all Ross's work. It was all Ross's structure and processes he put in place that were all set to come to fruition in 2013 in preparation for 2014. And I think even going through to, obviously it might be a bit more diluted now, but even going through to that kind of year 2018, 2019 period, a lot of the kind of success that Mercedes has had is still born from the processes and operations and structures that Ross got in place from when he was there. But I think Toto also is a good businessman he is. Realised that. He realised what wasn't broken. He realised he was like, right, these are good things. We need to continue this forward. This has been done for a reason. And obviously, some of the personnel started to change a little bit, and that's just natural. That's going to happen in any F1 team. It's you're gradually going to lose it. And there's still some very good people there there's a lot of good people there from when I was there as well. So you're retaining the experience and knowledge and the basis for what made them such a good team. And I think that's why everyone's so surprised that this year's has been like the worst season start since probably 2013 or 2012. And it's a shock to everybody, because F1, everyone tends to have kind of fairly short memories in it. You don't kind of, you only look back at the last few seasons and then base everyone off that, and then it can quickly change.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Because I find it fascinating when I sort of hear stories about how Ross worked at Mercedes, and obviously the structures that were put in place, as you've mentioned, that's obviously served them so well today. And obviously Toto, one thing that I've heard a lot in terms of what people praise Toto Wolff over is that he can come at this with this business management approach where he already knows where he's learned where the strengths are in the team. He's got trusted people that he's delegating to certain people. I mean, you mentioned Paddy Lowe earlier on as a big part of that building up to before he left in 2016, and obviously he's got people in place now that can look after certain facets of Mercedes, if you like. If you're looking at a house and it has its foundations in place, he has those core structures there, and obviously he doesn't feel like he needs to micromanage it. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, because I know micromanagement can be used as a negative, but in this case, obviously compared to what Ross was doing, Toto had those in place. He knows where people are strong, and he can just let them get on with what they need to do and only have to intervene in an emergency circumstance where that requires it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that sums it up really, and I think that's my kind of opinion of him as well. It's just, he understands what works. He understands. He's obviously a very, very clever person as well. So he can, if something is going wrong, he'll highlight the area which is going wrong, and it's not one of these ones where, I mean, I'm not going to name names or teams, but there's kind of like there's certain teams where if something isn't going right, the first reaction is a wholesale change and massive restructuring. And you think, well, and like Toto's clever enough to realize, okay, so if something isn't working, requires a wholesale restructuring, we need to figure out why it isn't working and just get the process in place to get that back on track. And obviously something's worked for the last 8 years. So it's, we don't need the wholesale restructuring, and it's never good. Wholesale restructure doesn't ever produce results instantly. It's always like, I mean, going on looking at other teams, is like you look at McLaren's recovery, and I think Zach Brown's another one who, like, I've obviously never worked for him, but you look at his kind of, since he's come in, again, he hasn't kind of tried to just rip everything out and start again. He's kind of tried to look at what worked, what didn't work, changed maybe the culture a little bit, but he's kind of gradually done it. He's not tried to do it all at once, and you kind of see their recovery of coming back to a team that it's a very strong competitive team, and it's like, I think he's another one who it's that understanding and that business mindset to kind of work out what's working, what isn't working, and don't panic if something isn't working, but get on top of it as quick as you can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That sounds great. And you might not want to mention names, but I certainly will. That sounds a lot like pre-Binotto Ferrari, sort of moving people about, changing structures. I'm sure there are other teams as well, but as a Ferrari fan, I can certainly relate to that. And obviously, they're doing a great job now because they seem to have put that all in the right place, and it seems to be going forward. So hopefully for their sake, that will continue. I want to ask about the drivers. Obviously, some famous names that you work with: Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, 15 world championships right there. That's certainly not bad to put on a resume that you've worked with those three, all at different times of their careers, of course. What must that have been like? Because just saying those names and thinking about the possibility of working with people like that on a day-to-day must sound so intimidating yet exciting at the same time.
Got Jenson Button in there as well.
Ah, so yes, sorry. I did forget Jenson and Rubens, of course.
He never won a world championship, though.
No, very nearly, but yeah.
I mean, again, at different stages of my career, it's like, it's very like, when I first started, they're like seeing you, Michael Schumacher, walk into your office. So even Lewis Hamilton, like, all right, I've been in a few years at that point. You kind of like, you're nervous talking to them, or like, especially you hear stories about them. You don't know if they're true, but there's often, like in any workplace, there's someone winding you up or kind of going, don't say anything like that, because then it'll ruin it. Michael was an interesting character in terms of, obviously he was coming back and it was his second spell, and obviously things were a little bit different to how we were previously, like in the results basis. Not purely down to him. Obviously, the car wasn't fantastic at that point, but he was you can you understood why he was world champion. He was very kind of focused. He was like, he didn't take for any kind of. Am I allowed to swear on your podcast or not?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
Just leave it on. He didn't take any bullshit. Like, and he could pick it up quite quickly as well. So like, yeah, he was very much that aspect of like, if you told him something, try and be kind of as straightforward and direct as possible. Don't try and butter it up. Don't try and kind of paint it in like a way. It's just like, if he asks you a question, just kind of give him the answers and like explain it to him. And he had a very understanding mind. So like he could always kind of, he would explain something. If he didn't quite understand something, like, or if he didn't quite understand something, he'd ask you more questions. But if he could detect straight away though, if you were trying to kind of just rosy something up, basically. Nico, he was probably the most focused driver I think I've ever worked with, especially in that 2016 season. I've never seen someone as kind of there was a reason he won. Oh, there was a couple of reasons he won that 2016 one, but like I totally understand his reasons for why he retired. I kind of read into it. The amount of energy and effort he put into that championship, like against someone like Lewis, which I kind of think he iterated to, but the fact that Lewis is a special character. Nico is obviously never going to come out and say I'm not as talented as him, because that's just the way Nico is. It's like he's the mindset, but like the amount of work he had to put in relative to the amount of work Lewis had to put in just to match his level, kind of thing, and just the amount of time he spent on a simulator or like meetings with his engineers or kind of looking at data and looking at all that aspects. I've never seen someone that kind of focused and dedicated in terms of drivers over the years I've done it.
I mean, what was the environment like working at Mercedes that year? Because I mean, as fans, for me, it was one of the greatest battles I've seen of all time between two drivers. It's similar to what we saw with Prost and Senna to a degree. I mean, what must it have been like? What was it like for you, sort of working at Mercedes? And obviously, you've got all that going on. And was there any sort of, I don't know, were there any structures in place to try and keep things separate from one driver to another, or was it that just purely down to what was going on at the track?
So no, I mean, I think it was definitely, looking back on it, like I don't think I realised at the time potentially how tense it was, but I think that was partly the aspect of I was factory based and not track side. I think at the track, obviously when the two drivers are in very close proximity, always there, I think the tension was kind of, you could feel it. But at the factory, we were kind of separated it from a little bit, but you could tell there was little things creeping in here or there. I mean, there was a few incidents between the two of them, and like, so they had numerous kind of rules of engagement kind of documents which we had to kind of write up for them. I mean, I think at one point it kind of formed the whole, they had a legal document they had to sign, kind of, I can't remember after which race it was, but basically it was I can't remember. I obviously wasn't visual to what they actually said in the document, but it was kind of basically like, if one of you crashes into the other again deliberately, there are going to be consequences of a sort.
So I'm guessing Spain 2016 is surely after that one, must have been, because that was the one where I think Lewis was forced onto the grass and he lost control and then went into the back of Nico, wasn't it?
I think that the Spain one was obviously Nico kind of cut across him. He didn't cut across, he went across. And what actually happened on that one is that Nico was in the wrong strap mode to start with, so his engine went into a deployment a lot earlier than recovery a lot earlier than it should do. So obviously he suddenly had lost speed. He'd gone across to cover Lewis. Lewis hadn't realised that, obviously, and then went off and lost control. Yeah. And it happened. I think it was after Austria, I think, was the main one, because they hit each other on the last lap.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
I think that's when that was the final straw on that one. But yeah, I mean, it was to the point, obviously, the Mercedes was that dominant that year that every race, it was basically they were 1-2 on the grid. So you're just going into every corner going, like, one's going to kind of just force the other off the track, or so every little thing was having to be looked at and taken into account, and it took up a lot of resource, I think, because I think they were lucky. Mercedes as a team were lucky at that point that it was an inter-team battle and there was no risk of another team coming up to it. Like if you had that kind of same battle now with Max on you, Red Bull would walk away with this championship. It's not, because you can't afford. You understand why the teams have. I know they don't say it, but 1 and 2 drivers, but you can't have your own drivers taking points off each other, because you'll just open it up, because it's just the amount of resource it takes from like, and distraction from actually getting the best out of the car is trying to deal with your 2 drivers. And yeah, I mean, like I said, in 2016, I didn't kind of realize it, quite the intensity being involved in it. So I think once you're involved, kind of you become accustomed to it. And then obviously I left Mercedes at the end of 16, so right at the end. So I didn't then see the next chapter of it. But obviously speaking to a few guys when Valtteri went there, everyone's basically first comments was just like, "Oh, the atmosphere is just so much better this season than it was last season." So I think it was a nice reset, and like it was one of those ones when you're involved with it, because you're involved, everyone was just pushing to get it done. And then it was that one, like you came down to the last race and there was 2 of them, and you were kind of, even though it was like your team won no matter what, so it didn't make a difference. But like, as a strategist, kind of like, I mean, again, it's an inter-team strategist. Your choices are fairly straightforward because you always favoured the car in front, because that's the rules. You shouldn't. There was no kind of aspect to kind of. You wouldn't ever split your 2 cars to try and do it. It was like, no, these are the rules we're doing. But it was like kind of, I was chatting to a guy who was like a designer or something. He's just like, the pressure. I know like no one, I'll never be publicised, but what happens if it's my part that breaks in this last race, which costs Nico the championship or costs Lewis the championship, or one way or the other I favoured it because something I've designed has broken in it. And like, it's that kind of pressure which comes with it. It's like, it was awful for everyone. I think it was nice when we got to the end because everyone relaxed and thought, right, okay, it's done. It's just done.
Well, yeah, I can imagine after Malaysia when Lewis had that engine blowout, and I just thought, oh god, like, because it was a few times stuff like that had happened to him, and I think Nico had the better rub of the green with that. I can imagine how they must have felt back at the factory thinking, oh god, not again. And it was ultimately the one that possibly cost Lewis that title in that race. As brilliant as Nico was, it did give him the opportunity to just take a P2 and he'd be fine. But I do want to talk a little bit about Haas before we sort of sign off, if we can. What was the motivation to joining Haas in 2017, I should say? Because obviously you've gone from winning 3 championships with Mercedes. You've worked there for as long as since 2006. You're familiar with all the people there. And obviously you wanted to seek pastures new at a team that was fighting in the midfield. So what was the motivation for that move?
I mean, that was pretty much it, really. It's just he kind of... I'd reached the point of kind of the stage as a race strategist, but like I'd done the things I'd felt I'd wanted to achieve. So I'd built my experience up. I'd worked with a great group of people. I'd won 3 world championships, and it was with that kind of aspect for like, all right, and I need now the next bit of progression in my career. And the way Mercedes was going at that point was obviously a very successful team, but because they were successful, there wasn't the kind of these avenues opening up for kind of new possibilities or becoming a trackside engineer, a strategist, or doing new things, because the company was just changing in that area. So the only real way was to kind of go to another team, and obviously the opportunity Haas came along, and I thought, yeah, it was obviously very different to my Mercedes experience. It was probably the biggest team in the grid to the smallest team in the grid in terms of personnel size and the amount of time they've been in the sport, etc., etc. But for me, it was just a case of I needed a new challenge. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be that kind of head of strategy, trackside role, and and achieve it. And there was an opportunity. I mean, there was an opportunity at a couple of other teams as well, and I just thought Haas was actually probably the one which just felt right for me at that point, because just in terms of the job and the kind of ability I'd have to bring my experience and knowledge to the role, was potentially a couple more other teams which are a bit more formed. They may have had structures and stuff in place which I wouldn't be able to put my own kind of mark on. So that was the main reason, really. It's just it's a weird thing to say, but it's like a couple of so everyone always asks me, do you regret leaving Mercedes? And I was like, no, that's actually one thing. I was like, never for one day. The only thing I regret, or not regret, is missed about Mercedes was the canteen, because they had some really good food there. Some good lunches. That was good. And I worked with some great people, don't get me wrong, but I still managed to see them and catch up with them as well. But at the same time, you felt at the end of 2016, the company was changing. The team was changing. The kind of, it wasn't the same atmosphere as it had been. And I don't know if that was a consequence of how the season had gone in 2016 and manifested itself forward. I don't know if it was a change of kind of like how the new people coming into it, the size it was growing to, because it took on a kind of rapid increase in growth in terms of personnel coming in, like 15, 16. And so I don't know how much that was an aspect of it, but it just kind of felt that my time was right to move on and try something new. And yeah, like I said, I never to this day regret my decision. It's like I don't believe. I think the things I've actually achieved out of Haas is there's a lot of the things where I was always confident I could do it in myself, but I've obviously never done it. So I had those questions I wanted to answer for me. It's like, can I actually do that job? Can I be that one who makes that call on the pit lane? What happens if this situation happens? I've always had the safety net of being the one level down, so I was never that kind of front line in terms of calling it, and then actually coming up and doing that. And it's the other things like getting to work with the drivers closer than I'd done previously, being trackside, doing the traveling. It was just the right move at the right time, I think, for me. It's like it got to the point of Mercedes where I felt like it was becoming very, very repetitive in terms of my job role. It's just like the progression. I felt I kind of reached an end in that respect.
Yeah, I could totally understand that, because I think in other sports, some people might look at it as thinking that you're making a step down, but the reality is that in F1, each team has its own merits for wanting to go there. It's not necessarily a case of, you have to be at Mercedes or Ferrari at Red Bull just because they're the biggest teams, or McLaren. There's obviously a lot to offer from one team to another, even if at a team like Haas, as you say. So even though in terms of the pecking order of speed it is a step down, it's certainly not a step down in terms of the job that you're going for, because obviously you wanted that career progression and an opportunity to sort of lay your marker down in the F1 world. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, and I think at the time, before I'd actually joined Haas, like one of my mates had asked me, who wasn't really into F1, but he's kind of like, why are you doing it? I was like, and he's a big Man City fan, so I said to him, well, it's basically like I'm sat on the bench at Man City and getting 20 minutes every couple of weeks, when I'm getting to go down to your mid-table side, but starting every week. So it was just, it was that aspect really, and there's still opportunities. And it's actually, and this is something I didn't realise before I went as well, that no matter where you are in the grid, so like obviously everyone wants to win, everyone wants to get on the podium, but you've always got your battles. So like finishing fourth, no, we didn't finish fourth, we finished fifth, we almost finished fourth, in the championship in 2018 with Haas, finishing fifth, like that battle for trying to finish fourth, if we'd finished fourth, and I know we just missed out, but it would have been like winning a championship, because we were never going to compete with your Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. That just wasn't going to happen, and you understand that. But if you could have finished fourth in the constructors, that's basically winning a championship. Or it's the same those seasons where you finish sixth, but you're the top, like the only cars in front of you are a Red Bull, a Mercedes, and a Ferrari. and you kind of, great. It's like, that's the best this car can done. It's like we've won a race. So you take your achievements from where you can, and it's like, all right, as you go further on the grid, it gets a little bit harder. Like, don't get me wrong, 2020 and 2021 was not a lot of fun, and finishing 13th when you potentially should have only finished 15th, I took no pleasure out of that. No, there was no kind of great achievement from that. But like that mid-table, I'll get me sports mixed up. The midfield battle when I was involved in Haas was some of the most pleasure and enjoyment I'd got out of like F1 strategy in the whole time I'd been in, and I learned a lot as well. I learned that like your strategy where you are in the field is very different, regardless. Like leading a race compared to midfield or at the bottom requires a so different outlook. Like, because you got the car pace, your strategy, while your strategy helps you, it can be the difference between winning and second. But the worst, if you get the strategy wrong, the worst you're going to finish is maybe third. Whereas, like, if you get a strategy wrong in the midfield, you could potentially be missing out on a 7th spot and finishing 14th, and that's a disaster for those guys, because every little point counts because it's so tight in there. And it's but yeah, it made it really interesting.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, because I imagine that, you know, going from Mercedes to Haas, obviously there is a difference in performance on the surface, but I don't imagine the workload to be any easier for you. If anything, I'd imagine it to be more intense, because you're having to do the same job as you were at Mercedes, like maximising efficiencies and getting the most out of what you have, but you have less available to you in terms of resource. And of course, you've got that competition in the midfield, where if you took, hypothetically, you took Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari out of the equation, you've got yourself a championship right there, where on any given day, one of 5-6 teams could come out on top. So it's so critical to make sure that you got your strategy spot on, the drivers are doing what they're doing, and everything's just running like clockwork, because everyone else is doing the same thing under such fine margins. You don't have that performance buffer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's pretty much sums it up, really. Yeah, it's definitely, yeah, it's more work than being, well, for a fact, you're in a team which is 200 people in it compared to a team that has 1,000 people in it. So, like, the things which just appeared in your inbox before, which you could use as information, you were then having to go and find someone who had the time and resource or knowledge to try and get that information, or you're trying to guide other areas of the company to do stuff which they hadn't been doing. So I think that's why, one of the reasons why Haas kind of wanted me to come in as well, is that I had my knowledge from a big team to try and concentrate on, right, what my experience and knowledge bring to this role, what aren't we currently doing that we can maybe try and do within our resource. Because obviously you can't match a Mercedes with 1,000 people, with 200 people, but what do you think we need to look at? What do we need to kind of get out? What can we do feasibly? And then it's kind of like building up all the kind of tool sets and developing and just trying to get the focus of the kind of, yeah, the field, the team in the right direction. But no, it was great fun. It was really good at Haas. Yeah, good team.
It certainly sounds fun. And of course, you obviously talked about the issues that they had in 2020 and 2021, how that was a difficult year. Sort of before we wrap this up, I mean, I just wanted to ask you about that briefly. How difficult was that in 2021? Because obviously the priority was purely just focus on next year's car, hardly any resource. There were upgrades that were sort of homologated from the previous season. How difficult was it to sort of get through that season? Was it just holding on to the hope that 2022 was always going to bring a brighter day, or was it just a case of just take things one day at a time and just hope that things get better?
I'm not sure I can answer that because I didn't get through 2021.
Well, that answers the question, I suppose.
No, I mean, yeah, it was difficult. It was the first kind of indications of kind of that kind of difference in team between like your established bigger team, whereas like there's lots of rumors kicking around with us, and I was like, and a fair play to like kind of people like Gunther and stuff, they kind of reiterated, it's like, no, there's no issue, it's like everything's kind of all fine. You obviously see the input of kind of like Nikita and his dad coming in, and obviously more rumours start up kind of thing, and then you start questioning, and it's like you see people hanging around the team which you haven't seen before, and you kind of you do wonder of like what direction the team's heading, and yeah, it's. I think the most difficult thing is to just keeping the morale of people up. And like I said, it goes back to the conversation we had earlier that the season's long and it's an intense season. And you turn up, you still work hard, and you get no results. And your prospect of getting any results is difficult. So it's very tough in that respect. And I like I said, I didn't get all the way through the season, so and it wasn't purely because of that. It was over issues, over aspects why I left a little bit earlier. But yeah, you've got to give full credit to the guys who just stuck it out and kept going, because it wasn't easy. It really wasn't. And like you said about the point of kind of saying, well, was it the process of this year going to be better? Well, potentially, but at the same time, you kind of think, well, we just don't know if this year was going to be any better, because you just don't, with new regulations, you didn't know where other people were going to stand. So, I mean, obviously, first year races, I mean, it's a much stepped improvement. And I think they're actually the team's racing again, and which is good, which is obviously a fantastic aspect of it. And that gives you that little bit more energy and that little bit of motivation again. So that's good from their side of view. But yeah, you got to September, October last year, and other than being told, well, it's all going into next year. I mean, I guess it depends on your viewpoint in life, and maybe I'm a little bit too cynical. I was like, well, I read it, I look at the competitive stuff. I kind of say, yeah, but every team's looking at next year, and every team's got we've got a bigger step to find than everybody else. And it's like, oh, not lose as much kind of thing. So it's yeah, I think other than that, that's all you could hope for. I mean, if this season hadn't been an upturn in form, I'd have been concerned.
Yeah,
I think it's just because you're like, yeah, purely because the message was everything's gone into this season. And if this season had turned out to still be in a struggle, then the team would have, I think, yeah, they've had some kind of big question. I think Gene would have probably been having some second thoughts about it, and that's obviously not on top of how things have developed in the early part of this year with other things. But I think Kevin as well coming back is a massive boost to the team as well. I think having that experienced head in there and he's well liked. He was always well liked when he was there before. So I think having him back in the team has been an additional boost as well as the performance, which is it's good to know. I mean, I'm really happy. Like I know I'm not there, but I keep in touch with them, and I'm delighted for the results they're having this season. And yeah, it's a really good battle in that midfield between a number of teams.
It certainly is exciting, and I'm glad to see that Haas is certainly what they did in 2021. It's certainly paying off for them in 2022, and obviously things are looking up. So hopefully that can continue for them. One final question, and it's going to be a nice quick one, hopefully for you. Do you have a favourite strategy call or a favourite race that you were involved in throughout your career?
I get asked this a lot, and it's kind of, I don't, to an extent, until someone reminded me of the Hungary call in 2020, which were all right. It was classed as illegal, where we pitted before the start to get off the wet tyres and put dries on. But at the same point, we had a car which was going to be at the back, so it got us running third and fourth at one point in that race, and would have had both cars in the points if we didn't have the penalties. And so it's kind of like, but still we got points in a race which we'd have never got points. So it was, making that call was definitely the right thing to do. And like looking back on it, you just obviously, it's highlighted it to everyone else now, but like we were the only ones to do it. It was a ballsy call to make. If we'd been further up the grid, probably wouldn't have done it. So it's kind of that benefit of being, we've got to take a chance. But it's obviously the one which sticks in my mind the most, because yeah, I got a bit of praise for it for a start, and I think it got us points in a season where we only got 3 points the whole season. So, I mean, that was the difference between us finishing 9th and 10th in the constructors, which I know isn't anything to shout about, but it's prize money at the end of the day, and then prize money going into after 2020, where money was at premium, was crucial for the team. So I'm proud of that one. And then generally, when people ask me about it, is that like anytime you kind of make a strategy call where you kind of get that undercut or overcut, or your car comes out of the pits and you just getting out and through a car you're battling with, that kind of gives you that kind of like a little G up and anything like that, because you put so much work into it and you're trying to take into account so many different kind of aspects and scenarios of what's going to be happening, that you can never obviously plan for every single permutation that's going to go on in the race, but you make a call right, or you predict something new, you kind of focus, this one we're going to do, this, and everything comes off. There's some kind of satisfaction from that. So just in general, that like I enjoy racing with people right in my strategy career, which is why again 21 and 2020 weren't great, because we were never racing with anyone. It was kind of you're racing for Williams for kind of not being last, and it's just like, I don't take any pleasure from that. Even if you win it, you kind of like, oh, well, that's what it is. But all those other ones are they're all kind of, I don't say merge into one, but they're all an achievement for me. And they all, like, anytime I make a call which is worked, it's fantastic. Just as if you make a call that goes wrong, it's absolutely devastating. But it's, that's the life of the strategist. You try and outweigh the bad calls with the good calls.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I don't envy the Ferrari race strategist that has to come up with a whole alphabet worth of strategies on the team radios so often. It's nice to hear plan A's working every so often rather than going to B, C or D. And I think of that and I sort of wonder, how many plans do you guys draw up over the course of a weekend? I'm almost afraid to sort of contemplate that, because it must be several.
It depends on how you look at it. So, I mean, like, if you have two cars close to each other, you probably have, in my eyes, you're like, with the tyres generally as they are, you'll have three plans. You'll have a plan A, plan B, plan C. And if your cars are both starting on the same tyre, generally your plan A will be the same and your B and C might be inverted, because your B and C are because something's happened in plan A, which means you have to go to that alternate one, or you drop some positions, or you're not sure how the tyre is going to perform, so we're going to try something a little bit different, and you want to kind of invert your drivers. Your reason why you don't go for, like, always in the back of your mind, you probably have other plans. You'll be looking for scenarios which happen, which may change it, but you can't go if you go into a race with too many options, then you clearly haven't narrowed it down to what's optimum or how you believe the race is going to play out. So obviously you need to be reactive if something unexpected does happen, and those kind of plans are kind of side plans, but you never kind of designate them as a distinct plan. And then the other reason why you wouldn't go in with more than 3 or 4 plans maximum is because you've got to deliver them to the drivers as well. So the drivers, you want to give them as much but as little information as possible, so they understand what you're doing, but they can't obviously be expected to remember everything going forward. So that's why, yeah, I'd always, from my point of view, for each driver, I'd try and give them as most 3 plans. Occasionally there'd be a 4th plan, and sometimes it'd be the same for both drivers as well. So, like, depending on where your position were and who you're fighting and what you believe your pace were, that's what you publicise. Obviously, on top of that, you have all your kind of safety car plans. You have your kind of lap 1 incident plans. You have your VSC plans. You have all then kind of side plans on that. But it's just, again, it's like what I mentioned earlier. It's like that kind of chess situation that you're trying to look from where you are and who you're fighting, of what move you need to make to counteract what move they may make, or do you need to make it first or react, etc. So you're just getting all that focus in your mind of what you need to be looking out for and how you would counteract it or be proactive going forward. And that's what you kind of keep internally, and that's what makes you good strategist from your, I'm not going to say bad strategies because there's no bad strategies, but your good strategies from your maybe slightly less experienced strategist who hasn't maybe come across some of the situations before. So it doesn't come across their mind of certain aspects they may be looking out for until they've actually experienced it. And it's amazing as a strategist, as soon as you experience something for the first time, that does stick in your mind, and you're always aware of it and ready for it in the next time it happens.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what happened in Hungary 2021. Everyone was learning from what you did the season beforehand, and except for Lewis, everybody decided to make that call and pit. But, there we go. The Mike Caulfield lesson there, right? From the F1 archives. That was great, Mike. We've got a lot there, so I'm probably going to do this as a 2-part series for our listeners. But for the benefit of those that follow on social media, where can they find you on social media? If you want people to find you, of course.
So I've got I'm basically just Twitter. I've got my account locked at the moment, but feel free to send a follow, and I may select a few. I might open it up at some point. But it's at Mike Caulfield F1 is my Twitter handle. Take a look on there. I also have a personal account, but I'm not going to publicise that one. I'll try and keep that one just about F1.
No, that's fine. Of course, I always encourage our guests to plug their socials if they want to, but of course, that's absolutely fine. But no, that was brilliant, Mike. I really, really appreciate you giving up your time to come on the show. There's certainly a lot to get stuck into with that, a lot of stuff to sort of listen in for those of you that are following. But as always, guys, if you have enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please like and give us subscribe to the channel if you are watching us on YouTube. And of course, if you think we're worthy of a 5-star review, please do consider giving us one, and we'll reward you by giving you a shout out on the next episode. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast. Take care.